deals with climate change and the behaviors that contribute to it. It's useful to learn about economic policies by using greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies as case studies because the majority of literature has focused on these emissions. Toxins that leach into groundwater and into our food and bodies can be viewed as externalities, just as carbon dioxide is, and therefore can be eliminated in similar ways. Traditional measures to reduce them, like car emission standards, are known as command and control, but these create inefficiency and are often administratively impractical. For instance, sulfur dioxide plants create acid rain problems, but requiring all plants to meet certain standards isn't possible because the cost associated with renovating older plants varies, and it's insufficient to limit regulation to new plants. It would be absurd to assess whether a plant should be renovated on a case-by-case basis. So to solve this problem, a market-based approach was introduced that encouraged firms using market signals to change their behavior. This way, it's in their own best interest rather than making them adhere to an explicit directive. There are 4 ways governments can curb emissions using market-based incentives. The first, a charge system, or Pigovian tax, is the most obvious. Pigou was a well-known economist living in 1920s smoke-filled London. He suggested if there are externalities, we should simply put a price on the negative behavior and charge people who are polluting. Although he was basically forgotten because of economic policies to get out of the Depression took precedence, many of the ideas within environmental economics come from him. True Pigovian taxes are beneficial because of their simplicity and because it's a source of government revenue. One of the only Pigovian taxes today was on water pollution in the Netherlands. It was phased out in 2011 because it was presented as a win-win that would simultaneously reduce pollution and raise enough money for a wastewater treatment plant. But in order to generate enough revenue to finance the plant, the tax had to be raised, which meant companies limited the amount they polluted. It's not possible to both generate revenue and change behavior. Even if the government is satisfied with only changing behavior, it's difficult to determine the elasticity of a firm's demand curve for the ability to pollute. If a politician's estimate falls short, then firms will simply pay the tax and continue to pollute. But if their estimates are too high, then businesses wouldn't be able to afford to pollute or to adapt, and the economy would suffer. The second instrument, a cap-and-trade system, mitigates this uncertainty because there is a limit set on the amounts firms can pollute. In the sulfur dioxide example, the government distributed vouchers to firms that allowed them to emit a specified amount of sulfur dioxide, and then firms could sell their extra coupons if they were able to renovate and reduce inexpensively. Since it was in companies' best interest to limit their emissions, firms were able to reduce them for less than half the expected cost. The price of pollution is very obvious in this scenario. The government can just refer to the going price of a pollution voucher. They can also use this to make future decisions. An unexpected benefit of the cap-and-trade system that a Chilean bus permit system unveiled was polluters who were denying their activity before signed up for a voucher when they became available. This might not be as big of a problem in Canada, but it certainly suggests companies would be more willing to cooperate. The last 2 measures include eliminating subsidies for harmful industries and market friction reductions. These are just a matter of eliminating blatant inefficiencies in our current economy. Subsidies in particular encourage harmful behavior and are costly to the government. Many arguments for environmental economic policy suggest that the costs of climate change are larger than the costs associated with changing a behavior. This is especially true, they argue, if market-based instruments minimize the damage. These arguments have merit, but another one for environmental economic policy is associated with a uniquely Canadian problem, that is, declining productivity. In Canada's early history, we had an average growth rate in labor productivity of 2%. Between 1940 and 1960, it hovered around 45%. Labor productivity is the amount of output produced per unit of labor input. Starting in the 1970s, this fell drastically. It makes a lot of sense when you consider the trend from agriculture to manufacturing and then the services. Since many services are based on one-on-one consultation, we can't increase the productivity in the same way we can make a better tractor or machine. So in the long run, we need to accept that we are going to be forced to consume fewer services or prevent the decline. Measures that would increase our productivity growth rate include a higher savings rate and investing in education or research. These function in the long term. In the short term, there would be less current consumption. Models such as the solo growth model illustrate the relationship between increased savings in the short term and long-term productivity increases. Here, the graph shows aggregate production as a function of labor productivity and capital. This is a function of time, so if you save in the short term, your output decreases, but eventually it will increase. To put this into perspective, Canada needs to be constantly increasing our productivity, and we have to make a concerted effort to do so. This brings me to Don Drummond, revered Canadian economist who published a paper in 2011 listing the mechanisms he thought would foster an increased productivity growth. He basically admits that these have all been implemented, but we still have a faltering growth rate. Although you could argue it would be worse if we didn't do these things, the point is we need to find something else. Going back to our growth model, we can see that since one of the variables in the Solo model and similar ones is capital, which can also be considered natural resources, if we limit the amount we use, similar to saving, we get the same benefit as regular saving. If the government were to choose eliminating subsidies, there's also the added benefit of recovering the money being poured into subsidies and relocating it to a beneficial industry. Therefore, we can think about investing in cleaner technologies and implementing policies that would limit emissions as investing in productivity. In the short term, we would be using less capital, but in the long term, we would profit. Now, unfortunately, the short-term pain before breaking even is 50 years, and the short-term pain, such as the Albertan economic projections, is quite significant. Eliminating subsidies would negatively affect the Albertan economy to the tune of a 6% drop in Alberta oil GDP, and a 0.16% drop in Alberta's GDP overall. It is important not to conclude from this that doing nothing would be better. There are aspects of a prisoner's dilemma, especially internationally, where no company wants to suffer alone or lose a competitive edge. Yet higher standards in one country have in the past proven to raise standards elsewhere, so a few leaders could initiate substantial change. Market-based tools are the best instruments we have, both politically and economically, to prevent toxins from entering our environment, food, water systems, and our bodies.